Sean. Okay. Right. If we move on to the agenda for this meeting, the first item is, are there any apologies?
I've had an apology today from Mary McIntyre, Chair.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you for that, sir. If there's been no other, can I invite, is there any declarations of interest today? No. Okay. Move on to an oral presentation on the SQA exams diet for this year, and I'll invite Mr. Ratter or one of his associates in the education leadership to present this paper. Hello, Gordon.
Thank you, Convener. The oral report is going to be provided by Mr. McCaig, which is his first meeting in his substantive role as the new head of service for performance and provision. So I'll hand over to Mr. McCaig.
Thank you, Mark. No pressure at all. Just to build that up there as well. So thank you very much indeed. Good morning all, and thank you, Convener. As has already been suggested, I will make this oral statement today, and we'll follow this up at the next Education Committee meeting with further detailed analysis of this year's outcomes. As committee will recall, in 2019-20 academic year, the Deputy First Minister decided that there would be no examination diet for the first time ever as a consequence of the impact of COVID on Scotland's learners. The alternative certification model, which the Scottish Qualification Authority introduced for 1920, was based on teacher professional judgment of children's attainment, with teachers recording estimated bands and rankings for each presentation. However, learners' teachers' estimated grades underwent a process of moderation, also by SQA, which considered 4-year average results for each school and subject areas, and did not take account of the prior attainment of individual learners. Committee will recall that concerns were expressed nationally that SQA moderation process had disproportionately affected particular schools or groups of learners, and as a consequence, a ministerial direction was announced on the 11th of August in 2020, which directed the SQA to award candidate results based solely on the estimates provided by schools and colleges. During that same announcement on the 11th of August in 2020, it was also confirmed that an independent review of the events following the cancellation of the examination diet and the accompanying recommendations would be undertaken and led by Professor Mark Priestley of Stirling University, and that the OECD's review of Curriculum for Excellence be widened to include recommendations on how to transform Scotland's approach to assessment and qualifications. In October 2020, following the publication of the Priestley Review and in light of the ongoing impact of COVID-19, the Deputy First Minister announced the suspension of the National 5 examinations diet, and at that point an alternative certification model for National 5 qualifications was outlined based on the teacher judgments supported by assessment resources and quality assurance. The Deputy First Minister made further changes on the 8th of December 2020, indicating that there would be no external assessments of higher or advanced higher courses. As a result, the entire 2021 National Qualification Examination diet had been cancelled and replaced by an alternative certification model once again. Following the initial National 5 suspension announcement, and in accordance with the guidance from the SQA and Education Scotland, the Education Department coordinated a local authority approach to quality assurance and moderation of assessment instruments across all of its secondary establishments and curricular areas. It is worth noting that this is a different approach to the previous alternative certification model in 2020, when there was an element of inferred attainment, whereas for this year, attainment was determined purely by demonstrated assessment evidence. Secondary staff worked tirelessly to ensure all assessment evidence was validated and moderated in all curricular areas, whilst also ensuring that high quality learning and teaching continued throughout the pandemic and during temporary school closures. This ensured that young people were well prepared on return to school to evidence the progress made in their learning through the alternative certification model the SQA put in place this year, and allowed their achievements to be rightly and fairly recognised. In accordance with the agreed model, SQA sampled evidence from all schools. In addition, Education Scotland reviewed the processes undertaken by the department and its schools. Moreover, the Education Department worked with other local authorities via the West Partnership Regional Improvement Collaborative, ensuring that validation and moderation of assessment instruments was undertaken at a local, regional and national level as per the recommendation of the Priestley Review. Moving on to the actual results then, having given you some of the background. Learners across Scotland received their 2021 results on Tuesday, 10th of August, albeit they were advised of the results by their school prior to the school holidays. I would like to take this opportunity to make you aware of a few particular highlights at this stage. Notably, 94 and 95% of pupils attained 5 or more awards at National 3 and National 4 levels or better. This is broadly similar to the performance in 2020 in these measures. At National 5 S4 year stage, 79% of S4 pupils attained 5 or more awards at National 5 or better. That is the second highest recorded value to date. Notably, at St Luke's High School, the proportion of S4 pupils attaining 5 or more awards at National 5 is the highest recorded since 2016. And also Barrhead, St Ninians and Williamwood High Schools performed strongly in this measure too. The gap in the proportion of pupils residing in the most and least deprived postcodes attaining 5 or more awards at National 5 reduced in 2021. And this is the third consecutive year where that gap is reduced and is the lowest that we've recorded thus far. At higher at S5, the highest ever proportion of pupils attained 3 and 5 or more awards, with the second highest ever proportion of pupils attaining 1 or more awards. In 2021, half of our S5 pupils attained 5 or more awards at higher, whilst almost 3/4 of pupils attained 3 or more awards. Several schools across East Renfrewshire recorded their highest ever performance for S5 pupils at higher, notably St Ninians High School performing its best ever at 1 or more and 3 or more awards. Barrhead High School recorded its best ever performance for 3 and 5 or more awards. Eastwood High School recorded its highest ever proportion of S5 pupils attaining 3 or more awards, with the best ever performance for S5 pupils at Wood Farm attaining 5 or more awards. At advanced higher level for S6 pupils, the authority attained its highest ever proportion of pupils attaining 1 or more awards. Notably, Eastwood, Mearns Castle, St Ninians and Wood Farm High Schools recorded their highest ever levels of S6 pupils attaining 1 or more awards at advanced higher level. And it is worth noting that this is following on from a very strong cohort of learners in S4 in 2019, which is pre-alternative certification model, and also a very strong performance last year in S5 at higher. These are just some of this year's highlights. At a future education committee, I will provide a fuller presentation looking in detail at the excellence and equity agenda, and in particular how we have raised the bar for key equity groups, including our most disadvantaged learners. For the first time ever, candidates will be able to appeal against any award by going directly to the SQA. Candidates can appeal on the basis of 3 criteria, any one of 3. That may be that there's been an academic judgment made in error, that there was an unresolved administrative error, or that there's been some discrimination taking place which is contrary to the Equalities Act. The SQA has decided that for most national qualifications, the assessment modifications which were in place in 2020-21 will continue for 21-22. Only yesterday, on the 18th of August, the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills informed Parliament that it is planned that an examination diet for National 5, higher and advanced higher courses will be held in session 21-22. If changes to public health advice mean that large gatherings of people are no longer permitted in April to June and exams are cancelled, SQA will ask teachers and lecturers to use their professional judgment of assessment evidence gathered throughout the school year to determine learners' grades. In summary then, like in 2020, this oral statement is different to previous years given the changes made to assessment approaches not only before the commencement of the academic year, but also during the school year. Temporary closure of schools and remote learning has once again been hugely challenging for our learners and their families. Yet despite these obstacles, our learners were fully committed to their learning, as demonstrated by high levels of engagement in remote learning and the successful outcomes. For school leaders and teaching staff, the demands of returning to remote learning and the additional pressure of ensuring all learners were ready for assessments, not to mention the process of the alternative certification model and the additional burden of ensuring validated and moderated assessment evidence in order to produce reliable awards for learners, has been hugely challenging for all concerned. Schools were ably supported by the Quality Improvement Team, working closely with school senior leaders and curricular subject groups throughout the process. In summary and in final then, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all pupils, parents and staff for their vital contributions throughout another challenging year for all in education, and all should be congratulated on the achievements of all our young people. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. McCabe. That's a very positive report, I believe. Is there any questions or comments from members at this stage? Okay. Mr. Provost Fletcher.
Thank you. Just unmute myself there. Yeah, I mean, just looking at the national comments on it, we've obviously seen an increase in attainment in the last couple of years when pupils haven't faced an examination diet. I don't really have a problem with that. I mean, I think given that pupils have had their learning disrupted, I think it would be a double whammy if, in fact, their exam grades were equally impacted in a negative way. So if there's a slight, shall we say, overmarking for pupils who've suffered due to the pandemic, I think that's probably fair enough. I just wonder, is there a sense, though, that the gap that we've always had between our own authority and other authorities has narrowed because of the procedures that have been put in place in the last couple of years? And have we any sense that, we won't go back to a sense of normality next year when exams, as you say, are likely to return in some form of the way we expect them, normality? I just want a sense that, there's no particular areas of concern in the authority where the gap's narrowing that we maybe need to address quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Joe, do you want to address that question?
Yes, thank you, Provost. I think in the first instance, I think I would reiterate the points that I made as part of the oral statement, in that there was a significant amount of work undertaken by all of our secondary schools and all staff across the council, including, as I said, the quality improvement team, and that was to ensure that all the assessment pieces that were used as instruments to determine the pupils' grades were valid and reliable, and that involved a considerable amount of moderation and validation of not only the assessment pieces, but also of the marking, to ensure that it was consistent, that it was fair, and that it did meet the standard that would be expected for, say, an A band award or a B band award. So we're confident that the marking and the allocation of those awards is robust and reliable. Thereafter, in terms of our performance as a local authority, of course, for this year, it's difficult for us to make any calls in terms of how well we've performed in comparison to other local authorities. We won't receive that information until later in the year, once that's released by the Scottish Government via the Insight tool, which will allow us then to make those comparisons. In terms of attainment across the country, as you've said, it has increased in 2020, but notably in terms of our performance against our virtual comparator, which is it's almost a virtual local authority, if you like, made up of 10 times the number of our pupils. And that gives a really robust measurement for us to compare against in terms of our performance. We are still significantly above our virtual comparator in almost all measures. Again, showing that the excellent experiences that our children and learners receive in this authority are outstanding. So in terms of the performance across other local authorities, yes, it has improved over last year in 2020. And of course, as I've said already, we won't be able to see that until we move into 2021 and that data is released. In terms of moving forward to next year, of course, at this particular point in time, the expectation is that we move back to national examinations under that traditional model. And of course, we will be looking to work with our schools over the period of the next year to ensure that we are able to maintain the high standards as best as we can that we have done so over the last year.
Thank you very much.
Just to say, that's great to hear that reassurance, and well done to everybody involved in producing these results. But it is reassuring, and it's good to know that we are where we expect to be. So thank you for that.
Thank you. We'll have Councillor Bamford followed by Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that, Joe. And I'd like to reiterate what you said about thanking all the pupils, parents and staff for all the hard work over the past year in really challenging times. The the stat that didn't give a stat, but I look forward to the official statistics later on about the attainment gap closing for the third year, and I think that is so important. So that's just a comment. What I would like to ask is, you know, the schools teachers have been gathering a lot more data, a lot more robust data over the last 2 years in order to, you know, because we were made aware that there wouldn't be the traditional exam diet. I'm just wondering, I know it's a I wouldn't say a heavy burden, but it is a lot of work for teachers. Are we going to consider, are we going to continue with the robust gathering of that data in the hopefully unlikely event that exams get cancelled next year, just to ensure that we have all the data as we go along? Because I know the hope is that we go back to the traditional exam diet.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Mr. McCabe?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bamforth. Well, as you know, and you'll be aware, our schools are very data rich, and we as an education department support them in doing so. And I think that is a cornerstone of the successes of our schools, and the ability to monitor and track our pupils from very, very early stages of early learning and childcare all the way through until the point of departure, and even some cases thereafter. And that allows our schools to really focus in on our learners, to identify areas for improvement, and to target those to ensure that all our children and young people attain all that they can do. And again, as you'll appreciate, we use that data rigorously in order to improve any gaps in learning, whether that be through children and young people as a consequence of deprivation or any other factor that can have that impact on our learners. In terms of the next year and looking forward to next year's examination diet, at this particular point in time, we'll obviously still be awaiting further guidance from the Scottish Qualifications Authority. The announcement was only made yesterday, and therefore we'd expect to see that hopefully as soon as possible. The earlier we get that, then the sooner we can start to prepare for next year's assessment programme, if you like. In terms of the message that was announced yesterday, the expectation is that the mitigation, if you like, in terms of any further outbreak of COVID or any temporary school closures and such like, would result in teachers looking at assessment evidence which takes place throughout the course of the year. So rather than having an assessment window, or an assessment course, if you like, within each of our schools like we did this year, so that the examinations were taken under a particular time frame and under a window, those assessments that would be used to reach pupil grades and awards next year will be those assessments which are taking place throughout the course of the year. So in that sense, it shouldn't cause any further burden to our teaching staff, because it would be the naturally occurring assessments that they would be taking on an ongoing basis throughout the course of an academic year anyway, and therefore there should be no expectation of any further workload or burden on them in that sense. However, as is always the case, we await the further guidance from SQA, but certainly that's the message that was received from yesterday, and so we would hope that any further burden or challenges for our staff would be kept to a minimum.
Okay. Any supplementary question, Caroline? Councillor Bamforth?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. So I lost connection there, Mr. McCaig, for about 5 minutes or so, but I certainly got the beginning of your presentation, which clearly shows a huge number of positives. In fact, almost breaking records in certain aspects on our results. Quite clearly, there's been some extraordinary positives that have come through from remote learning. And I appreciate that we're not going to be heading over to remote learning as the preferred model. However, there must be certain aspects of the remote learning that have clearly had a positive effect. Are there any of these positive benefits that we've had that can be incorporated into the revised model? I mean, I see we've got the Building Back Better model that we'll be discussing later on. Is there anything that can be incorporated into that we've learnt from our previous 18 months of learning? Thank you.
Mr. McCaig?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Wallace. Yeah, I think over the last 18 months, undoubtedly there have been huge successes in terms of our remote learning and the provision that we have provided to all of our children and learners, not only in the senior phase but throughout. And I know that in previous reports provided to committee, we highlighted some of those successes from early years primary all the way through into the secondary sector. I think a lot of those successes have primarily become as a result of the hard work and dedication of our staff across all of our establishments, who have gone to extreme levels to ensure that they have upskilled themselves in order to develop a remote learning provision, which, whilst as you've suggested, will never match face-to-face teaching and learning taking place in the classroom environment. It has been the best solution that we could achieve over that period of time, and it has been delivered in such a way that the levels of participation of all of our learners have been really high levels of engagement, and that has led to, I believe, the outcomes that we saw this year. In terms of moving forward, I think, as you've suggested, I think it's about picking out the parts that have worked well and the parts that we would like to continue. As I've said already, of course, we look forward to hopefully a full year of face-to-face learning for all of our young people, but notably some of the online learning resources which our staff have developed over the last 18 months are things that I think will be really critical to our children and young people moving forward. So such things as the online video libraries, which allow young people to log in at any point and to access lessons which have been pre-recorded by members of our teaching staff within East Renfrewshire Council, but also more widely our work with the West Regional Collaborative Improvement and the West OS Library of Resources. Our work with a variety of different curricular area groups across the country and pulling together all online resources which are appropriate and are suitable for our children to access at any point in time, day or evening. And again, the online environment which we now have through Microsoft Teams, and that ability for any young person who may be absent from school for any reason, whether that be an illness or whatever it may be that it's not COVID related, will still allow our children and young people to be able to engage in their learning distantly and remotely without feeling as though they've missed out on that learning progression over a period of time. So I think, like you've suggested, there's certainly been huge challenges. I think that the staffing and the level of staff improvement in terms of their use of these technologies, the resources and the significant library of resources which have been built up over a period of time will certainly continue to be used by our staff, but they will be picked to be used in the appropriate way, in the appropriate manner, to complement what is taking place within the classroom environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. McCaig. Councillor Wallace, take any supplementary question at this time?
Well, yes, I think I have. Which you mentioned, Mr. McCabe, I beg your pardon, that the remote learning will never, will never match the classroom environment, and yet clearly it has, given the results and the presentation that you've given there. And I'm more than well aware of the upskilling and extraordinary additional hours, etc., that teachers have put in order to get themselves upskilled and make sure that our young people are getting the delivery of learning that we expect of them. And that really, as I'm saying, is what's underlining my concern that all that effort that has gone into upskilling our staff will not be lost, and that we can pick out the best of that and use it for the positives moving forward. Thank you.
Convener, would it be okay if I just came in just to, on the back of that, of Councillor Wallace's point, just to perhaps give a couple of examples of ways I think we won't lose and we will build on it. I mean, I think the approaches to supported study that have been done remotely. So schools have done supported study in after school for many years, and that's been, had a huge impact on supporting us with raising attainment. But what schools have been able to do in the last year is take the very best teachers, perhaps for higher maths or higher chemistry, and offer larger classes at a time that suits the pupils and the member of staff, perhaps at 7 o'clock with the pupils logging on. As Mr. McCaig said, we've now also got 2,000 videos available on the West Online School, and that is something that's as part of the Regional Improvement Collaborative is going to continue to be invested in, so that it doesn't become something that, as you're saying, Councillor Wallace, we look back fondly and say that's what we did during 2021, but we've moved on now and we don't use that anymore. So we're looking to make sure that there's high quality there, and where there are gaps in some of the national qualification courses, they're available. And I think what that will also do is strengthen that partnership with families, so that families can support their child remotely from home by using some of those videos. So I think it's about making sure we've got those videos there and then appropriate resources that families can work together. And I think if we can do that, we know that sort of the family background can make a huge difference in terms of how well young people do. I think that will also be one of those factors that will help us address the equity gap. So I think there are things that we need to make sure, as you said, that we don't just go back to normal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ratta. I wonder if I can bring in Councillor Merrick. You've been very patient.
Thank you, convener. No, I just wanted to congratulate the department, the teachers, the staff, all the staff, in fact, and the pupils themselves and the parents. We've been through this a couple of times, and everybody knows 2 years ago, nobody could have imagined what was going to unfold. But here we are, and we've got a terrific set of results with many positives in it. And thank you for the presentation, Mr. McCaig. I wanted to make a couple of points, if I may. And there was one, I think the Provost mentioned that where will we still sit in terms of all our local authorities? I suspect we'll still be ahead of the game, and that's because it's not just the last couple of years of school that matter, it's the entire journey, the whole way through. And that, obviously, the end of school is not the end of education, as I've learned very much over the last couple of years myself. So it's that journey from nursery school right the way through that prepares our children for life, whatever challenges they're going to face. The one thing that is particularly pleasing, I think, well, many things are pleasing, but the fact that the gap has reduced, because I'm hearing through the media, the attainment gap has got bigger across the country, across Europe, as you would have expected, because pandemics hit the more deprived or people with the greatest challenges the hardest. So that really is something to celebrate. But I'm wondering how we did that. Because I know that we were already focusing on closing that gap. So our work, well, do we move that into a remote context and still at work, or how did we do that? Because that is something that's outstanding, and I suspect that other parts of the country will want to try to copy that.
Okay. Any comments?
Yep, thank you, Councillor Merrick. I think as the point you've said, it is noteworthy that we have saw that third year of a decrease in the gap between those pupils living in quintile 1 and quintile 5. And I think that, as you've suggested, I think that's because of not only the work that's taken place over the last 18 months, it's been the concerted effort now for a considerable amount of time, not only as part of the national agenda on closing the equity gap, but even before that point in time, this local authority had a continuous focus on equality for all and improving life chances of all children and young people, regardless of their backgrounds. And I think one of the key reasons and one of the factors in that ability to do so and to close those gaps is a relentless interrogation of the data that we have on our children and young people. I mentioned that earlier, that our schools are data rich. They're very ably supported by the Education Department in the analysis of that data, whether that be for our children in our early learning and childcare establishments, primary or secondary schools. And we are continuously focusing on that key message with our schools, our school leadership and our teaching staff on a regular basis, that there has to be a continuous focus on closing equity gaps, whatever they may be. And not only do our school senior leaders and middle managers have access to that type of data, our class teachers have access to that data and are able to identify who those pupils are and to track and monitor them over a period of time. That then follows that the schools will then introduce appropriate interventions, and the schools obviously know their pupils best and know their communities best, and they will obviously drive that agenda given the resources that they have to tackle those gaps in the way that they see fit. So I think it's a mixture obviously of two things. It's that relentless interrogation of the data that we have to identify those young people who are not performing as well as we would like them to do, based on a multitude of different characteristics, one of which being deprivation, and it's then the interventions that our schools introduce to tackle those gaps, and as I said, ably supported by the Education Department on those matters.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Merrick, for illuminating us in that important area. I wonder if I could bring in Councillor Buchanan and then hear from Ms. Collins.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Really just to echo many of the points that have already been made, and of course thanks to Joe for his comprehensive a breakdown of where we are at the moment that we can possibly have, and we look forward to the full report coming forward in the near future. But also thanks for giving the background and the detailed information in terms of the alternative model that we've been working to. I think that was certainly useful and gives everyone an explanation of where we are and how we got to this situation. I think it clearly clarifies how robust the process has been and how much work and diligence has gone in over the last year to ensure that the work that our pupils do and their families and the work that our teachers do has been recognised, and how important that has been during the last few months. So thanks very much for that. The figures, I think, speak for themselves. As has been mentioned, we've got very good figures, and we look forward to the further detail coming out on that. But equally, as some have mentioned, the narrowing of the attainment gap, which continues, it's moving, thankfully, in the right direction, and it's good to see the progress that has been made there, despite the setbacks that we all know have occurred over the last 18 months. And as has been mentioned previously, hopefully the positives that we can take from it and the positive lessons learned about remote working, about the ability to take that data and share that data and use it for the benefit of all of our pupils is extremely important going forward. I also know that since the establishment of the West Partnership, it has progressed extremely well. And I know that as a key member of that partnership, our education team have worked tirelessly to share the information that we have and to ensure that there is equity and equality right across the board, not just here in East Renfrewshire. And I think it's important, and the robustness of the process that we've just been through and that sharing of information shows that this is a positive step, that these marks are well justified, and the work that has been done by teaching staff across the area has been vitally important in ensuring that we've got that fairness and equity. And I think that's some of the positives that we can take going forward. And a great deal of work. And thanks to our teaching staff for being so diligent during what has been very difficult times for everyone concerned. So thanks again for the report. I look forward to the full report as it becomes available. But I think there is a lot to take forward from this. And of course, congratulations to all of our young people who have been so successful in managing this process and moving forward with it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buchanan. Can we move on to Ms. Collins, please?
Thank you, Convener. I just want to pick up a few points from that have been discussed earlier. And one of the things about equity, I think it would be amiss not to mention the hubs and our emergency childcare. And if you recall, when we brought a report to Education Committee about remote learning, we also said that our staff were fully committed to reaching out to those kids who maybe weren't traditionally known as vulnerable, but we knew that learning from home was challenging, and that we did attendance at our hubs were exceptionally high, because we realised that for some children, not attending school and being at home wasn't the best mode to learn. So we did have a lot of children in the hubs who required that support. And if you look at, there's a correlation between key equity groups and vulnerabilities with attendance in hubs. And we worked very closely with our colleagues in the HSCP to make sure that we didn't have a definite list. We were reactive as families who maybe didn't need that support initially. But as lockdown continued, both lockdown 1 and indeed lockdown 2, we were able to reach out and ask and invite children to come into a school building and have that interaction. So I do think the hubs have played a part. Also, when children returned to school last year, remember, key groups were allowed to return, and our senior phase pupils were identified as a key group. So our senior phase pupils were back at school in June and starting their coursework, and they hit the ground running. And when they then come back in August, and our secondary head teachers were remarkable in making sure that course content was fully taught and children had those rich experiences prior to the second lockdown, because I think it was always in the back of their mind that this was going to happen. So they did have those contingency plans. And a bit about just really where we go from now. Although we expect exams, we did have an alternative certificate process this year. That process was developed in partnership with the department and our secondary schools, and there's a group of deputies, and I think we shared that when we brought the ACM process to committee, but we also shared that with parents and pupils. And we would propose that that group continues to meet. Not to be pessimistic, but I think we need to have some sort of plan in the background in case the exams do get cancelled. But my colleague, Mr. McCaig, and Dr. Ratt and I were just talking yesterday. We don't want over-assessment of young people either. So I think that group needs to take place too. So we talk about the evidence gathering, which is a workload issue for our staff, but we've got the young people at the centre of that. So we need to make sure that as learning and teaching is going on, we are proportionate and we're collecting the right evidence, but we're not over-assessing or over-burdening the staff. So I really wanted to reassure you that that announcement yesterday doesn't mean that we're all just sort of resting on our laurels. We will still continue to consult and do what's best for the young people, the staff and the families. And I think it would be also amiss not to mention that a lot of young people have responded better to the ACM than the traditional exam. Now, that's not a debate for just now, but you will be aware from the OECD report that the senior phase and how we assess progress in that is going to be part of a national debate. So East Wren will be fully engaged in that debate and will keep elected members up to speed. But there will be a lot of discussion in the next few years about the role of SQA, which is part of a national review as well, and indeed the senior phase. So you will be able to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of this year as part of our ongoing engagement with that review process. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gilbert, can I bring you in, please?
Aye.
Yeah, your thing's flashing. No, okay, that is concluded.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good.
Yes, I think we can all, certainly I think Councillor Fletcher, myself and Bart in education have generally been consistently positive presentations made to this committee. And it always begs the question, how can we continue that improvement year on year? I think the report addresses that, the hard work of our teaching staff, parents and the young people in bringing forward our improvements that we see before us here. Are we happy to note the report? Yes. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 4, which is the Education Department's end year report, which perhaps will extend the debate, the positive discussion we've had so far. Mr. Ratter, can I invite Dr. Ratter, can I invite you or Mr. Hay to address this paper?
Thank you, Convener. Mr. Hay is going to introduce this paper.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, convener. And like some other people this morning, I appear to be having some connectivity issues, so apologies in advance. If I do drop out, I will try and get back on. It seems to have stabilised a wee bit now, but just in case, just a wee pre-warning there. So as you said, the purpose of this report is to update the committee on the department's performance across 2020 to 2021, and that's based on the indicators and activities set out in the outcome of the council's outcome delivery plan, and elected members are asked to consider and approve this report. Elected members will be familiar with these sorts of reports. It's obviously a kind of annual report that we do bring to the committee. And the background to these is set out in paragraphs 3 and 4, with the end-year report for 2019-20 having been approved by committee last October. Turning to the paper itself, members will note the end-year report sets out performance under both outcomes and then separately under customers, efficiencies and people, with two separate aspects to it. Importantly, members will recall from previous reports that due to the differences in the kind of corporate reporting cycles and the education reporting cycles, there is a bit of a disconnect. So the figures used are actually from the kind of previous school session. Obviously, as Mr. McCaig's just given us a wee update on the figures from last school session, the ones in this report are actually from the prior one, so there is a wee bit of a disconnect, so it's just so there isn't any confusion there about what statistics that we're actually looking at, and that's why particularly sorry, in the appendix there appears to be blanks at the moment. That's obviously updated when we get those figures finalised. Given the unprecedented challenges of the last 18 months and obviously the ongoing impacts that we still see from COVID, across the whole of the council, no specific targets were set for the plan itself. What we're going to be doing is baselines will be established using this year's performance, and that will obviously allow us in subsequent years to monitor any improvements or any performances that we have going forwards. I think it's fair to say that in spite of the huge challenges, and members are obviously very aware of what they are. We've brought several papers to committee on that. Our schools, nurseries, and indeed the kind of wider department have faced a really, or provided a really, set up a number of great sort of initiatives and things, and this provides a really strong overview of the breadth and activity and support that has been put in place. There has been a continued really strong emphasis on us developing solutions to the challenges and making sure all of our services, whether that's things like our remote learning provision, our ongoing support for staff and sort of developing their own skills, or our customer services support that we provide as a department can continue as well as possible. And you'll see in paragraph 8 within the cover paper there's a really kind of strong overview of the breadth of activity that we have undertaken across various different aspects. I think importantly, paragraph 9 goes on to summarise some of the key areas of focus for us going forward in terms of the improvements we'll look to achieve as we continue to recover and hopefully in what will be a much more normal year. Well, certainly we're hoping we'll see a much more normal year than what we've had in previous years. So there's a number of kind of various sort of measures and things that we'll be looking at, and obviously we'll go on with the next paper that will cover some of that in a wee bit more detail in terms of what our expectations are for the year ahead. So in conclusion, convener, this report summarises the department's performance across 2020 and 2021, outlining some real strengths in spite of the hugely significant challenges of the last 18 months. Through adapting our own service delivery, we've continued to provide high quality learning to our children and young people. And I'd like to just note the professionalism, commitment and indeed the innovation that all of our staff, and that's across all job roles, have demonstrated in delivering this. I think it sets a really strong baseline for us to build upon as we continue to recover in the months and indeed years ahead to seek to deliver further improvement and obviously continue to deliver the best quality services we possibly can to all of our customers through our schools. So, convener, the recommendation is that elected members are invited to comment and approve this end-year report for 2020-2021. And obviously happy to take any questions that members might have on any aspects of this.
Thank you, Mr. Hay. Are there any comments or questions? Councillor Bamforth.
Thank you, Chair. It's really a couple of comments. Thank you, Graham, for an excellent report as usual. I think when people look at end of year reports, particularly in East Renfrewshire, education, it tends to be end of year. They look at school achievements, they look at exam results. I think it's really important that the information that's in there about our early years and about our early years prevention officer, who engaged and supported 189 families, and the uptake in our psychology of parenting, the 50 pre and post wellbeing checks. I mean, we look at exam results at the end, but I think as was alluded in the previous paper, that's those results are as a result of a long, a lot of work that's put in from early years onwards. So I think the early years interventions we do should be recognised more, rather than focusing on the exams at the end, because when we look at our positive destinations, that says it all. The other thing I thought was important was the fact that 30 of our schools and centres have Eco Schools Green Flag awards, and I think that's really important, not just because of COP26, not just because of the climate emergency, but this is our young people's futures, and I think it's so good that we focus on that. So well done for being having the highest number of any local authority of schools and centres being awarded the green flags. And the last thing, I'm going to segue into something here. 84.3% of parents are happy. That's quite evident in terms of our placing requests in our schools and early years centres. And Joe's smiling there. I know, and I just want to say a big thanks to Joe and particularly Colin and to Mary and Harvest. And I'm sorry, I don't know who the other ladies are, but they have been working so hard over particularly the last week. I know we've had something like 2,500 placing requests for our education facilities this year, and I know what a trying time it's been to keep, to manage that well. So I just wanted to add that wee bit in so that I could thank them for all the hard work, because I don't think people see what goes on and how much work goes on in the background about that. So if you could pass my thanks on, Joe, to your team. I'm not quite sure if they're your team anymore, but Colin and his team. So thank you. I don't have any questions. It was just to highlight those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bamforth. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. Just interested in what Councillor Bamforth was mentioning there about positive destinations, which I actually see is actually decreased. Is there any, perhaps you can maybe expand on maybe what the reasons are for the decrease in positive destinations? The other one, there's one which I'll keep till the next paper, I think, but the other one is the increase in costs, which I presume are COVID related. Perhaps you could maybe expand on what these costs actually were, what the increase in costs. The automatic assumption would be that with schools being closed, you would expect there would be actually decrease in costs, but I'm clearly not familiar with where all the costing base is coming from. So maybe you could let us know where the increase in costs came from. So that's two things. One is the decrease in positive destinations. The second one is the increase in costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Collins, you wishing to respond to that question?
I can respond certainly for the first part about school leaver destinations, Councillor Walls. You're right that it has decreased. And when we went back to look and we do a follow-up measure, it's actually increased again. And I think we suffered from when it was collected and the gap in between. So we had young folk who were in a positive destination, but didn't actually maybe go to it, and the school had recorded that. And then we realised there was a gap in the sort of our processes and communication. And when we looked at the follow-up, it has increased. But I also think we work very carefully to make sure that it is a sustained destination. And I think some of the categories that young folk were choosing is not recognised as that. So we have been doing a wee bit of lobbying to say, you know, they are in a sustained destination. They could just put down something like volunteering and they would get a score in your score sheet. However, what they're choosing to do is actually meaningful and worthwhile. But you're right that there was a decrease. It was a genuine decrease, and it was basically something really a timing issue where young folk hadn't hadn't gone where they said they were going to go, and the school picked that up when they returned after a break.
Okay, Gordon.
And, so, Convener, I can just give a kind of a conscious Councillor Wallace asked that kind of second point, just about the costs. I've not got the specific numbers to hand here, Councillor Wallace. What I would say is, obviously, we did have extra funding and things came in that was obviously put into the schools in terms of supporting sort of, you know, additional teachers and things that had come in. And whilst obviously schools were closed for a period during that, obviously the costs, if a lot of this thing are fixed and would still be in place, so, you know, teacher salaries and all that kind of stuff still went ahead. It's obviously the cost per pupil place, so it still reflects you know, the kind of ongoing cost that we would still have throughout that period. Obviously happy to kind of look into some of that maybe in a wee bit more detail and get some more detail to you. I don't have to hand, but certainly that would be my understanding of where that's come about from.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace? No. Dr. Ratter?
I'm conscious that Councillor Wallace was maybe on mute. I don't know if you want to just come back, Councillor Wallace, and then I can maybe give you a little bit more detail about the cost part as well.
Thank you. As the previous chair said, it was absolutely wonderful that he would never miss when Councillor Wallace was on mute. So anyway, here we go. Yeah, no, just in terms of costs, okay, we look at the increase in cost per pupil, but when you actually add it all up, there's huge sums of money that have been spent, and I'm not suggesting overspent. I mean, there'll be very good reasons as to why the monies were spent, but I think we have a responsibility to residents and beyond as to how that money was spent, and it can be properly accounted for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe if I just come back on that point as well around the costs, it's probably worth noting that the figures contained in the report are for 1920. So they'll actually, because of the sort of delay associated with the local government benchmarking framework, they'll actually predate COVID in that regard. Councillor Wallace is right to highlight that there's been, over the last 18 months, differences in terms of the cost. Mr. Hay mentioned some of them around teachers, but we've also had significant increases around cleaning, that as with materials and staff there to make sure that the schools were safe. So if there was additional funding provided for that from the Scottish Government, but as Mr. Hay said, happy to come back to you, Councillor Wallace, if the specifics around the LGBF, we can provide more detail on that one.
Okay. Well, I think we've considered the report. If there are no further comments, can we agree the recommendation to note that report? Yes, thank you very much. Moving on to item 5, the draft Building Back Better and Fairer framework. Dr. Ratter, is that yourself?
It is. Thank you, Convener. Members will be aware that in January 2021, we brought the Education Department's 2021-2024 Local Improvement Plan, and that was approved. And as part of that process, elected members noted that that plan was high level, that it was a 3-year plan which set out the sort of key areas for improvement over that period. It did recognise the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and highlighted how we would support recovery and address learning loss. But a number of the comments at that point indicated, particularly as we were in the midst of lockdown, that there was an expectation that the Education Department would be responding to that on an ongoing basis. Since then, there's been a number of national reports that have highlighted the impact of COVID-19. Members have referred to some of the impact in terms of educational outcomes this morning. Paragraph 6 of the report sets how East Renfrewshire schools in particular supported our learners effectively during the school closure from January to March, and Mrs. Collins referred to some of that earlier, and how we sought to address the impact of the pandemic. But during the last 18 months, the department has had discussions on a number of occasions with staff, with parents and pupils on the unprecedented changes that have been made as a result of COVID, particularly as we came out of the different lockdowns. And it's allowed us as a department and our schools to reflect on what's gone well and what could be improved. And paragraphs 10 and 11 provides more detail of a sort of summarized feedback that we've had from our different stakeholders. And it really, I suppose, relates to some of the questions that Councillor Wallace was highlighting earlier. Feedback from stakeholders identified areas that we could really capitalise on as we move forward. And our aim in bringing this framework, a simple framework, was not just to return back to normal, but instead to use the pandemic as an opportunity to sort of improve and to build back better. The International Council of Education Advisors, which advises the Scottish Government, spoke about using the pandemic as an opportunity to ensure that Scotland becomes a truly extraordinary educational system. Stakeholders in their feedback focused on the use of technology. We've spoken a little bit about that this morning. The importance of holistic approaches to education, and Councillor Bamforth has highlighted that as well, just in the previous paper, and that need to make sure that we're providing support for mental and physical health and well-being for all our learners and staff. And our ongoing self-evaluation has also highlighted the importance of reviewing and refreshing the curriculum and enhancing our approaches in a collaborative way to improvement. And Mrs. Collins picked up a little bit of that around particularly the qualifications and the assessment linked to the OECD report. So the draft Building Back Better and Fairer framework, which is included as Appendix 1, tries to take account of all this feedback and our self-evaluation and sets out the key priorities required to support schools and services as they seek to recover following the pandemic. It's a framework rather than a detailed action plan. Those action plans would sit underneath it. It's designed to complement the local improvement plan and identifies that focus for the next or a period of 15 months. Elected members will identify that it's been organised under the department's vision with attainment, achievement and excellent experiences, and also linked to the National Improvement Framework and the key drivers that they set out. Given that the pandemic has affected all our children and young people, it does have an expectation on improving outcomes for all. But as we've discussed this morning, it does recognise that COVID has disproportionately affected certain equity groups. And so it looks to address those inequalities of outcomes going forward for those groups. The department will continue to report on our progress, both with our local improvement plan and the draft framework through our annual standards and quality reporting process. So elected members are asked to approve the attached draft Building Back Better and Fairer framework for 2021-22. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Director. Comments, questions? If not, can I ask a question, Dr. Ratter? There was a question I think I heard recently about the pressures on our head teachers in particular over the past summers, where they haven't been actually able to have time off due to the demands arising from COVID-19 and other issues. Is that being addressed for the future? No doubt about the commitment of our head teachers, but then a position to get at least a wee break over the summers.
No, I think you raise a very important point, Councillor Lafferty. I think the position last summer with the pandemic and the position we found ourselves in as a country, with the changes that were coming out, with the guidance that was coming out on a very regular basis, did mean that I think our staff in schools and our senior staff in particular found that very difficult to get that break. You know, it was a constantly evolving picture, and they did extraordinarily well responding to that. My sense in talking to a number of the head teachers this summer is that I think the guidance has been, and I suppose the positive direction that we've seen across Scotland in terms of the the vaccination and the progress there has meant that we're in a better position. The schools returned yesterday, as elected members will be aware, and certainly the head teachers that I've spoken to so far have been very positive and welcomed the changes that have been made. Elected members will be aware that particularly in terms of the way that we respond to positive cases as a country, but also within schools, that has been changed to reflect the progress that's been made with vaccinations. And I think that will be something that will be very welcome, because that was a significant burden to our schools responding to that and doing the test and trace procedures. And that now is a public health responsibility rather than a school responsibility. So that is very welcome.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Councillor Wallace and then Councillor Bamforth. Gordon, you want to make a comment?
Sorry, I'll get off.
Question?
Yeah. Thank you. The just looking at, there's one or two sort of phrases or words I've kind of picked out from the paper here. One is well-being. The other one about reducing the cost of the school day, which would be absolutely superb if we could do that. The burden that is on families. But again, yes, this holistic side of things, I don't think we can underestimate. I mean, in the previous paper, it was mentioned there about the resources that we managed to get through to Barrhead in order to support the families in which the remote learning environment wasn't ideal. And I don't think we can underestimate the impact that social care and the social care departments have on the benefits had from them that are impacted on the education department. And I think that has been very evident through COVID. I'm just curious if I could ask Mr. Ratter what his thoughts were on the proposed impact of the likely or proposed centralisation of social care and what impact that could potentially have on our education within East Renfrewshire. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there was. Thank you, convener. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously the original proposal was looking at the adult social care and creating that national care system, and the consultation that is now out has brought in children's services, which would have significant impact for local authorities. I think it is something we all need to take very seriously, as you've said. We particularly at the moment, I mean, that sits with HSCP within East Renfrewshire. So depending on what goes forward there, I was at an ADES meeting last week where the Education Secretary was asked about that, and I suppose the intention is that it produces more consistent outcomes for those most disadvantaged children and young people across the country. I guess the debate and the consultation will need to be on whether that is the best way to do that. We've brought a number of reports within East Renfrewshire, and we'll continue to do that on, I suppose, the improvements that we've made for our children and young people, and the close working we have with HSCP. So it'll be our intention to feed into that consultation through ADES, and to make sure that we're sharing thoughts on that one going forward.
Thank you. Is there a supplementary question from you, Gordon?
There is, thank you. It's just my experience of being a councillor over the last 15 years or so. I've seen that this gradual removal of this kind of silo mentality in which the many departments are talking to one another, a lot of crossover, which has been of great benefit to every department. But I would think in particular with the marriage of social care and the education and the breakdown of barriers there has had a significant impact on what's been happening in education in East Renfrewshire. And I sincerely hope that we will have a robust argument against centralisation of social care, particularly the impact that it's going to have on the education of our young people. And I would raise this thing about the attainment gap that we have, and I would suggest that the centralisation would have a significant impact of the Negative, I would suggest, in East Renfrewshire because of the many benefits that we've seen of this marriage of social care and education. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bamforth, and then Councillor Merrick.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Dr. Atta, and I appreciate this is an overview. It's not in great detail because I know what you'll be doing will be far more than this. Obviously, as I think Councillor Lafferty mentioned about the head teachers and supporting them, I'm interested in item 9 of your proposals when you're talking about building staff capacity to support children and young people's wellbeing. And you mention in number 5 about supporting teachers in their professional capacity. And I know, as I say, Councillor Lafferty mentioned about supporting head teachers because obviously they've had a huge workload over the past year. But what I'm thinking about, and I have brought it up before, and I'm sure Mrs. Collins answered me very adequately before, about teachers' wellbeing, because we understand what a stress, not just in head teachers, but in the teachers supporting some of our young people. And I know as part of now the Morrie House, the teacher training, they do look at the wellbeing, health and wellbeing of our teachers. And I just wondered if it could be, I'm not want you to add a whole list of things to your agenda, but I just wondered if we could include in that the wellbeing of teachers, because I think it's not just the head teachers, it's all of our teachers. Mental health and well-being that has to be looked after, because we know that the past 18 months or however long it's been now has placed a significant stress on some of our younger or non-head teacher, none of our teachers that aren't the senior leadership team. So I just wondered, could that be added or acknowledged somewhere, that we really have to look after them as well?
Absolutely. It might be worth if I just bring Ms. McColgan in, just to give you a little bit more detail, Councillor Bamforth.
Thank you for that. Siobhan, are you able to?
Thank you. Yep, so in terms of staff wellbeing, that has very much been a focus, because I think we are all aware that the impact, particularly the last year and a half, has had not just in children and young people, but in staff as well. Our educational psychology department have worked really closely with schools in terms of developing some healthier minds resources that does have a section that absolutely focuses around staff wellbeing, with different kind of mindfulness exercises, different tools and strategies to support wellbeing. And in the recent in-service day, there was focus and presentation and workshops around that in order to support staff. In addition to that, a number of staff throughout our schools have been trained in mental health first aid. And again, that's not just about supporting children and young people, but about recognising signs of maybe staff members needing a bit of support and a bit of help, and having a range of tools and strategies to be able to support them. That there is very much a focus at the moment around wellbeing across all of our schools, and we have in every primary school and secondary school now, we either have a member of staff identified who's about to start training, or else a member of staff who's currently undergoing counselling and schools training. So that as well as all the range of services we've got, including the Healthier Mind service, there's also that building capacity within schools to be able to offer that direct support as well.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Councillor Merrick, you're very patient again, Colin.
As always, convener. Thank you. I wanted to ask about one little aspect. Thanks very much for the report, and no problem approving it. It's a good way forward. What I wanted to ask about was parental engagement. This is a bit that I think it's incredibly important, parental engagement, in terms of not the subject matter clearly, because our children are learning far more than we will ever know for sure, but the processes, how to set up an environment, all that sort of thing. I'm wondering how many parents, how they feel engaged with education. I mean, everybody's worried about it. All parents worry and think about it, but are they empowered enough to contribute? That's sort of the general question I'm asking. How do we do that? How do we engage parents as a very significant, parents carers as a very significant partner in the journey forward?
Okay. We'd like to pick that up.
If I could come in here, convener, if that's okay, just to share a little bit. And again, it would tie in, I think, quite closely with the Building Back Better and Fairer framework, because I think we have had lots of lessons learned over the past year and a half, and during some of the periods of school closure where we had to look at different ways of engaging with our parents and making sure they were involved. And I think there's lots of learning to take forward in terms of there's different ways to do it now, and there's definitely not a one size fits all. We're currently developing the new parental engagement and involvement strategy, and I think as part of that we have been consulting with parents around what has worked, what hasn't worked, and where do we go moving forward. And I think what we need to look at is that kind of blended model where for some parents, they want to be in the school, they want to be part of focus groups, they want to be in and around. For other parents, that just doesn't suit them in terms of potentially childcare, transport, and actually using some of the technology that we've developed suits them. I think what parents are very clear about is they want information that is clear and understandable to them, used in a language that they very much understand. So we are going to be offering a suite of training for our staff around, just effective communication with parents. We also, I think, listening to parents, one of the things that's come is around that partnership working and family learning, in terms of how they can work together with schools in order to support their children. And one of the areas mentioned in the Building Back Better framework is around the ASN review, and communication and partnership working was a focus within the questionnaire that went out to all parents. And actually what's come back from there is it's about the type of communication, the type of information that's shared, and the timing of it. So we will be working really closely together with parents to develop the strategy in a way that meets their needs and addresses the areas that they see as a priority in terms of moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Buchanan.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much. Really happy to approve this document, this framework going forward. I think it is an excellent document. It brings what we already know and what we know works well to the fore, and I think it highlights some of the positives that we've discussed earlier today and brings them into the equation moving forward. And as we know, it's not an exhaustive list. There will always be lessons to be learned, and we continue to do that, and we will move forward on that basis. But I think it highlights that we do aim to continually improve. One of the key aspects of it has, as has been mentioned, I know Councillor Wallace touched on it, the cross-departmental working and working both with other departments in the council and indeed beyond the various partnership groups that are involved. And I think it's key that that is recognised, because we know from experience that they are vital in producing a rounded outcome, if you like, in terms of how we move forward, and we see that day in, day out. Councillor Wallace mentioned the consultation on social care and the additional aspects that appear to have been brought into that consultation. I share his concerns. I think many of us would do. I think it's fair to say that there are a number of aspects in there that would give us concern, certainly not just as an authority, but beyond. And I'm sure as part of that consultation, those responses and the responses to the consultation will be robust in that nature. And I know that discussions are ongoing to that effect. So happy to approve the document. we know it is a framework, and we know what works well, not just for us as an authority, but what we can share with others in moving forward to ensure that equality and that the outcomes for our children across the board are delivered to the best possible, in the best possible way, and for the best possible outcomes. Thanks.
Thanks for that contribution, Councillor Buchanan. Moving on to Mr. McCaig.
Yes, thank you. I would just briefly add an additional point which Siobhan touched upon earlier regarding the consultation of our parents and trying to improve that engagement with those who sometimes can be hard to reach. Back in 2019, East Renfrewshire was one of a small number of local authorities who engaged in the National Parental Involvement and Engagement census or survey, as you may wish to call it. And as part of that survey, there are many questions which ask our parent body about the factors which perhaps dissuade them from taking part in the school community more widely and becoming more involved, as well as their concerns. And most recently, in the last 6 months ago, we intended to take part in that survey again, but due to COVID, that was removed, and we no longer took part in that survey. But we do intend to take part in the national survey once more. That will run from January towards April of 2022. And that survey will include questions in relation to things such as the cost of the school day, as well as the factors which dissuade our parents from becoming more involved in the school community. And we, as Siobhan mentioned already, as an education department, we survey our parents regularly. This survey will take many of those questions which are already in place for us as a local authority, and we'll be able to amend that and adjust it to our own specific circumstances, no specific questions, and that will then allow us to look at and analyse the responses from our parents at an individual school level, so that we can then look to support our establishments to engage better with our parents and our parental body.
Thank you for that, Mr. McCaig, but comprehensive.
Okay. No further questions. If not, can we approve the framework referred to in item 5, the Building Back Better and Fairer framework? We content to approve that, yes? Yes, seems to be. Thank you all very much for your attention and contributions this morning. It appeared a rather thin agenda, but it had real substance, and thank you all for the time you've put into this morning. And I'm certainly impressed by the members of the education team that I've not been too familiar with, and the quality of their contribution, Ms. McColgan and Mr. McCaig. Thank you very much. Well, that concludes this meeting, and have a good day and a weekend. Bye.
Congratulations on the meeting.